we go.
Okay.
And we're live. How about that?
Hello.
Hi.
I am Moses.
And I'm Jackie.
And our last name is Shepherd. Want to talk about the innocent?
Yeah, the names have been changed in this story to protect the innocent. So, just wanted to put that out there.
So, this is a live feed, so we're kind of doing this ad hoc. But one thing that we wanted to do, yes, we've never done this before. So, one thing that we wanted to do though was we wanted to share our story. And what we're going to do is we're going to share this in three, I guess you would call them segments or sessions. So this is session 1 of 3.
Yeah.
So we're going to give you a little background. And before we do that, we just wanted to share a little bit about what Project Spillway is. So Project Spillway is our Facebook page. Those of you that are seeing this probably know that. So we just wanted, as a reminder, to read what Project Spillway is about. So you may know us by other names, but here we are, Moses and Jackie Shepherd. This is a ministry for any who have reached crisis point in their life. Born out of our own work, marriage, and life crisis, we found a way forward we never anticipated. In the face of infidelity, mounting debt, work panic, and a future filled with meaningless pursuits, life culminated in crisis that brought us to a point of desperate need. Through the most unlikely of paths, we rediscovered what was promised thousands of years ago in the Gospel of John as the full life, and described in Malachi as floodgates of vitality waiting to be poured out. We have come to call it the Spillway. There is more to life than desperation. Okay, so in this first session about our story, we wanted to kind of give you a backdrop of where we came from, how we got to what we call our point of desperation, and kind of just lead into it from there. So maybe, Jackie, if you want to start off and just talk about some of the things that led up to our crisis
Well,
point.
actually, I was just going to say a little bit about how we met. We've known each other since we were 13, actually, and it was not love at first sight. He was 5'1", approximately, and super duper skinny, and I was as tall as I am now, which is about 5'9". So he was really short and kind of annoying, and he thought I was kind of annoying too, and we were stuck in a carpool together with our parents, and it was just for 1 year, and then that was it. But we grew up around the corner from each other, and we would run into each other in the neighborhood, at the grocery store, at at different places, and for the next 10 years. And then we ran into each other the last time was at Sam's Club. He was working there. And I always say, if you're looking for a really good guy, I can tell you I got mine at Sam's Club. So it was just kind of like a little corny thing I always say. But we just kind of hit it off. We went to coffee and started hanging out. And then 9 months later, we got married. So that was just a little bit about our marriage story.
Yep. It's interesting. You get into life, and so when you're dating and you kind of have this flurry of romance around you, and then it seems like things just start happening fast, right? You get married, and then it's on to the next conquest. The next conquest is find a house. Next thing after that is move up in your career, have kids, and so we started boom, 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 doing all those things. So you start moving through life pretty quick, and pretty soon you just realize life is, in a way, passed you by a little bit, and things have happened before you even know it. So, so probably this started all about
year 10.
Yeah, so probably about 8-9 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, what did you like? How would you start off some of the things that you noticed that were going on that started going different?
We had purchased a home, and before that we had a condo. So we still owned the condo. There was like a bunch of financial stress with that, and then additionally we had our first child. Mm-hmm. And so that was a difference too. We waited 8 years to have a baby. So changing into from being just the two of us to three of us, and then shortly after there was three, there was four. So at this point, it was year 10, so we had our second child at this point, and so our second child was a little bit of a difficult one, and it just made us be a lot more stressed.
Yeah.
And
So during this time, I was feeling a lot of pressures at work. So I had moved from working for a smaller company into a big public company, and was feeling a lot of pressures that I wasn't used to, and things were moving along. I was fully capable of doing this from an acumen standpoint, but the problem was I was feeling like I was drifting in life, and things weren't making sense. I felt disassociated from my roots, from most of all, the love of God that I had grown up with, and I had become so acquainted with as part of the rhythm of my life. So one thing that I realized was I came to this conclusion in my heart, was that I didn't want to do what I was doing anymore. So at the time, I was in corporate finance and accounting, and I came to a place in my heart where I knew like this was not the path forward for me. And so I decided to come home and share that with Susan.
Right. And at first I was like, I don't know, we think about this, and one of the things about Jacob is that about Moses is that he is very intense. He goes at everything super hard, and then he can kind of change his mind really quickly about things sometimes. And when I married him, his parents had told me, he's really intense, you're going to have to balance him out, and that's what I thought I was doing. But after a while, I realized this isn't just him wanting to, be flippant about it. He really wants to do this. And the problem was that I was looking for the bigger and the better and the more. And when you can't, what he wanted to do was move into a teaching position, and you can't have bigger, better, more if you're making less and less money. So I really decided I was going to put my foot down. We had a conversation that I recollect very clearly in the Chipotle parking lot, and I was not going to let him do this. And I put my foot down about this thing, and we are not doing this, and you can just stop. You need to just go back to work and do what you always do. So, the problem was, though, is that I had this shopping addiction, and I was racking up credit cards, pulling out money from our 401k in the thousands of dollars at a time behind his back, and him doing this and changing jobs would totally have, I would have been found out. It would have wrecked everything.
So several times during this time, I would stumble across a credit card bill or something online where what is this?
Yeah.
And when we say thousands, we're not talking like a few thousand dollars, thousands and thousands of dollars. I'd stumble across something, and lo and behold, it just felt like I got walloped in the face, because by my profession, I'm paid to manage
money.
fiscally money, money from a fiscally responsible standpoint. So I felt like I was getting kicked in the gut, and this happened multiple times. And so between that and feeling like I was backed into a corner from a professional standpoint, that's where I started to, I got to a point where I said, okay, fine. If I have to do this, then I'm going to go all in. So I'm going to double down, and I poured myself into my work, 110%. And when you do that, there's a callousness that is created within your heart when you ignore the things that God is putting in your heart. I was just reading the other day about how, we in our life, we are on a journey to discover what it means to allow ourselves to be loved by God. And to be loved by God, to allow ourselves to be loved by God, means that you, by definition, are callous to Him. And so at this point, I moved into a very callous state. And when you're callous, you become callous. Not only when you become callous to God, you become callous to those around you. You become callous to the things that, the way to be sensitive in life to those that mean something to you. So,
right. And the callousness, it wasn't just to God, it trickled down across the board to our family, to our children. And it was just, it became not fun marriage anymore.
So the one other thing that's interesting to point out about a situation like this is sometimes though, it's kind of like these little itty bitty incremental things like that that don't seem like a lot at the time, but if you were to back up and look at them like a graph, like a line chart, you would see this steady decrease, like going down, down, down. But when you take one snippet in time, like for like a week or a month at a time, you can't see that. You just see, it's just probably a little blip. But if you could look at that line chart, you'd just see it going down, down, down.
Right.
So it was, I was on a downward trajectory for sure. And we didn't see it probably because we did have a lot going on. Susan was in school. I was,
I was getting my hair license. He was getting his master's degree.
My master's
we had
degree.
2 children. He was
Young
working,
children.
and he was really young.
Yeah.
He was working and traveling a lot.
Trying to master a new type of job that involved multiple sites. So a lot going on. So a lot of things to get lost in life, and it's probably no surprise to a lot of you out there listening that as Americans, we love to get lost in our busyness, and so constantly. And at that time, I wore it like a badge of honor. I mean, think about it for a second. If you're listening out there, how many times when someone asks you how you're doing, you're like, I'm just so busy. And so it's very easy to get lost in our business, and we feel good about it. We feel like as Americans, we're really proud of that. And so that's a whole nother story, but something that Susan...
We have like a podcast or something we could definitely talk about.
Yes, a podcast that, we could probably do a whole thing on that where we could get lost in that topic. But anyhow, so we found ourselves getting lost in our busyness as well as someone we weren't.
Right.
We were trying to find
being
ourselves
somebody
as
that we
someone
were not. Right.
Yeah.
So you started drinking a lot on these business trips.
Yep.
And
yeah.
we're gonna...
So I did start drinking a lot, and that was the first of many things. And I think, at this point we'll kind of leave this as kind of our session 1, and kind of pick it up with where I started drinking a lot and getting into a lot of other things. But I think, if we leave it at this point, I think the one thing that, I would like to say is that, Project Spillway, as well as what we're going to be talking about, is really a process of rediscovering who we were meant to be in relationship to God. That's what living in the abundant life is about. It's not living in a state of desperation or day-to-day, what I would call being a drone.
Right.
It's meant living in the spillway, the overflow of life. And so just keep that in mind as you're listening to this. This is not a story about finding our way back to where we were. It's a story about finding our way into something that was completely new and better.
And I would like to say too, for anybody watching this, if you are in a situation of desperation and you don't know what to do or where to go, or if your marriage is just, you see the downward trend, I just would like to reach out to you and let you know that, 1, nothing is so far gone that God cannot redeem it. He can redeem anything.
Yep.
And then number 2, please feel free to message us and connect with us. We are in the Akron area, but we can always message back and forth, and however we can encourage and make ourselves available to you however we can. So please feel free to reach out to us. We helping people that are hurting like we have been fills us up, and we love doing it. So
all right, we'll see you for session 2. Thank you.
Hello everyone.
Hi there.
Again, my name's Jackie Shepherd. This is my husband Moses, and we're just here sharing our story with everyone. We wanted to start up where we left off last week. And before we did that, I just wanted to remind everyone about kind of our motto, where we're coming from. This is a ministry for any who have reached a crisis point in their life, born out of our own work, marriage, and life crisis. We found a way forward we never anticipated. In the face of infidelity, mounting debt, work panic, and a future filled with meaningless pursuits, life culminated in crisis that brought us to a point of desperate need. Through the most unlikely of paths, we rediscovered what was promised thousands of years ago in the Gospel of John as the full life, and described in Malachi as the floodgates of vitality, waiting to be poured out. We have come to call it the Spillway. There is more to life than desperation.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we're going to get into the second part of our story today, and we've entitled this the shadow side. So we're going to get into some tough stuff, some tough and rough stuff. Before we get into the story, though, there's a little quote that kind of encapsulates a little bit why we're doing what we're doing and why we're saying and going and digging deep into this part of our story. And this is a quote by a guy named Brennan Manning, and it says this: "To live by grace means to acknowledge my whole life story, the light side and the dark. In admitting my shadow side, I learn who I am and what God's grace means." So last time we left off where Moses, was getting into some drinking habits related to work, the pressures of work, the pressures of life, everything that was mounting up. I had a boss that made this quote one time, or told me about this story one time, and he said it like this. He said, there was a guy in an office, and his boss basically set on fire the room around him. And in order to get out, he had to chew through the walls in the back of him. And that's a good way of describing and summing up what Moses was doing, what Moses was going through. Moses was trying to chew through the walls in the back. He was making a way forward on his own steam. So during this time, I had gotten into drinking more. I was never a big drinker in my life, actually, before this time in my life, and I got pretty good at it during this time. So had some long days at work, followed by drinking, followed by partying, followed by a lot of traveling. During this time, I probably got up to about 70% travel at work, which was a lot of travel, a lot of being away from Jackie and the family. And so when this was going on, there was a lot of opportunities to decompress and to relieve the pressures of work in other ways. And drinking was great, but it was almost like there was something out there lurking that that was a lot more stimulating. And that thing was women. So it started off pretty slow in a way. And what happened was I was on a business trip, and I remember meeting a woman in an airport. And one thing led to another. There was drinking, and there was some promiscuity involved. Nothing as deep about it, what I'm going to get into, but nonetheless, this woman,
just kind of scratching the surface.
Yes, I was scratching the surface. But this woman said something interesting to me. She said, "I bet you do this with a lot of women." And she's like, "You're really good at whatever you're doing." And it scared me. I kind of stepped back, and I thought to myself, this is not something I want to be good at or indulge in. It frightened me. But yet, like anything that you start to dive into, that is what we call our shadow side. There's an interest, there's a peculiarity that you start to dive into. You want to know more about what's out there. So essentially, that's a pretty good summation of what comes next. So during this time, I did dive more into that area of life that womanizing part of me is what I would call it. I don't think there's any good way to put it. I think to try to clean it up would be the wrong thing. I don't think there's any way to clean up a situation like that. So Moses became a womanizer. I became a womanizer. And I started meeting women, young women on business trips who looked up to me, who I worked with. So I had the thing going for me that, they looked up to me, and there was alcohol involved. If you think about it, our spouses that are at home watching the kids, they're the ones that are holding down the front lines. And yet I was away, basically having essentially parties and super dates paid for.
Yeah, they were these super dates. And I was at home. He would come back, and he'd gone to these baseball games and clubs, and there was bottle service and all the stuff that private planes. I mean, I'm home taking care of 3 little babies, and I am not a young woman that has not had children. Like, there's a lot of things that come along with being a mom, that you're just not yourself anymore. And it's a situation that I just could not compete with.
So I remember the first time that I slept with a woman that was not Susan. Something that you should know about Susan and I is we were both virgins when we got married, and we had only been with each other. And so I remember the first time that I slept with a woman that was not Susan, and it was a very, everything leading up to it was, great party time. And just like Satan, he loves to take us and just drop us. So he drops us, he puts us up on this great cliff, and then he just tanks us and drops us onto these sharp rocks. So I remember after I slept with this one, I was just devastated. And it was horrible. But at that point, I reached a point in my mind where I felt like all the things that I had heard about horrible guys that cheat on their wives and do these things that they're not redeemable. they're the worst of the worst. That's how I always believed. That's what I was raised to believe. And there's parts of that where you say, how can someone do that? And I found myself in that place. So talk a little bit maybe about what you were going through.
So I did not totally understand what was going on with him. Like he said, he was on business trips when this was going on. So he'd come home and maybe be a little bit hungover. And I just didn't really think that I'm the kind of person that always thinks the best of someone. So I just thought that was something that he would not be doing. And then after one particular trip, he came home and was not happy to see me. He was happy to see the kids, hugging, kissing them, but then he didn't hug or kiss me when he came off the plane. And I thought that was kind of strange, but we went home that night. He slept on his side of the bed, which is not normal for someone who's been on a business trip for a week away from their wife. And then the next morning I was still working. So I got up and went to work. It was on a Saturday. I'm a hairdresser. And I was working at a salon, and I had to work on Saturday. So I got up to go to work. And typically he and I, whenever we leave the house, somebody kisses or hugs and waves goodbye, whoever's staying home. And he did not do that either. So I got to work, started thinking, and texted him. And he agreed, yes, we need to talk. Something needs to be talked about. So he sat me down on the couch in our living room one Saturday afternoon and said, I don't love you. I don't know if I've ever loved you. We probably shouldn't have gotten married. We're way too young. And I think we should just call it. We've got 2 great kids, and I mean, we can be friends and be parents, but I don't know that we necessarily need to be married any longer. And he wanted me to say, that's fine, great, you're right. You know what? We had a good run. Let's go ahead and call this whole thing off, and we'll have our own separate lives. And even though I had been doing things that were not good and keeping him prisoner basically in this job because of my spending habits, I knew that he was the love of my life. I knew that I loved him more than anything. And I don't care what he was saying. I knew that I married him because I loved him. And I knew that I've always loved him. And even though I've done wrong, it didn't take away from the fact that I love you.
Nope.
So I went crazy a little bit. Like, I'm not a crazy kind of person, but I was hysterical and screaming, and no, this is not the way things are supposed to be. And that was kind of how I got let in on the fact that something was definitely not right. So then, my spidey sense starts to go off, how women have that. You start,
One thing that's interesting though is so up to that point, I was thinking when I went to tell Jackie this, I thought, like, during this time when I would tell her this, that she would be very amicable to it and all this, things get put in your head that are just not true. And when that happened, and the instant I told her, I could tell that I broke her heart, just totally broke her heart. And as a result of that, when I saw that happen, I realized just how far I had gone. The other thing that I wanted to mention about what happened was some of the things that you said just now, where I had said, that, I don't know if I had ever loved you, that we were young. So like one thing that we have really come to realize is that when you're going down a road like this, often Satan comes into your life and he rewrites history. He's a revisionist, is what we call it, of history, which is a common tactic that he uses. And we've had this confirmed over and over as we've talked with different men and women and couples that have gone through similar things to us, in that this is a common tactic that history gets rewritten. So anyhow, you want me to keep going? Or?
Well, basically, we ended up, that situation turned into a very, if you could call an affair small, it was a small affair. It was his first full-on affair.
Yep.
I found that out a couple weeks after that happened. And when that came to the light, we made some changes in our life. I decided not to work outside of the home any longer. I started homeschooling our children. We decided to go ahead on that third baby that we really wanted to have.
But the reason we did all this was because
we were trying to put a Band-Aid on our life.
I saw that I had broke your heart. I felt horrible. I hadn't changed, but I felt horrible. I felt really bad about what I had done. And I thought, this is not what I want to do. And so that's why we decided to make some of these changes.
Right.
So go ahead.
Yeah. So we made those changes. We ended up having our third child, and I changed jobs. He changed jobs to get away from the situation. And we just kind of started cooking along with life again. Everything just seemed to be clicking away.
But you used the key word. Those were Band-Aids. Yep.
Those were Band-Aids. We actually looked back at that season of our life and called that Band-Aids.
Yep.
And then we, our youngest was about 9-10 months old.
Yeah.
And Jake, we were, I'm trying to think, how did this go?
Well, so I got into another job. We had some Band-Aids that we put on the situation, but I hadn't changed. I just felt bad about what had happened. So when I got into the new job, things sort of, it went on repeat. Okay. Except this time, because I was a little bit, the shock level had worn off from what I had done. I was emboldened to go deeper. So it was more like this time, it's kind of like when you're on a drug, you need more now. And so I kept going deeper. And so when I did that, this time the parties I got into a position actually that was higher. I had gone into a company that had, it seemed like, endless amounts of money for some of the quote, business trips and meetings, and just extravagant parties is what I would call them, and drinking, and lots of men and women together that really had no business drinking so heavily and being in these types of situations like they were. So anyhow, as a result of that, I found myself in a second full-fledged affair at the second job. And what happened as a result of this is this one was more serious. It lasted longer, about a year.
There was a number of points where our family almost completely unraveled. We were literally holding on by a thread. And that thread was probably the Lord Jesus just holding on to us because,
Yep.
we just
Yeah.
should not have made it through.
Yeah. So I was full in the midst of like, and we were in full throes of this whole thing. And I think the thing to point out that was really important is you started to change.
Yeah.
You started to realize that we had put Band-Aids on things. And when we ripped them off, there was a sweltering, infected,
Festering and disgusting.
yeah, infected
there.
sore underneath.
Yeah.
And so you started really humbling yourself and just like going to the depths of who you were.
Yeah.
And so talk a little bit
Yeah,
about
sure.
that.
I remember one specific evening, actually it was the middle of the night. He was on a trip and I had called him. He wasn't answering his phone. I'd fallen asleep. You wake up after you'd fallen asleep, something like that, and you remember all the things that you're stressed out about. And it was like within 3 seconds, I was in a full-on panic attack and I couldn't breathe. And all I could do was call the name of Jesus. So that's what I did. And that was probably the first time I ever really called him like that before. And instead of anxiety, he replaced that with peace, where I couldn't breathe and my throat was like something was holding it. So I couldn't breathe. He just was released there. And from that day on, he and I, the Lord Jesus and I, just continued to build our relationship together. And I would go to him about things, and I would want to complain about Moses, and I was met with what any parent would do to their young child. Don't worry about him, you worry about you, and I'm working with you. So you just keep your eyes on me and we're going to be okay. And at that time, I didn't know if my future was going to hold this man. I didn't know if I was going to be a single mom and I was just going to be raising them on my own without him. But I knew that God was going to be right there with me and I was going to be fine. So, I just started changing my own heart, my materialism and my need for more, and my...
I think something happened during this time that was really impactful to me. You got to an awareness that you were okay with living your life without anything else except for our family.
Yeah.
and me.
Yeah.
Right. You got to a point where like everything just kind of like dissipated that was on the fringe. And so you came into a narrow focus of what was the most important thing.
Yeah.
And especially your relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
So Susan or Jackie was going through all this stuff during this time, and what I would say is that was really interesting about it is, as a result of this, she started praying for me, and things started happening that were the best way I can put it is frustrating. Things started being frustrated in my attempts at doing and living this life that I was living. So people, I attribute to the fact that because this had been going on for so long, first of all, people started to find out what was going on. Second of all, people started to pray. They were praying for me, so things started getting frustrated, and I just realized it wasn't bringing what I thought it was going to bring. And the other thing was during this time, the other thing I'll mention is I really didn't feel like I could go back to Jesus, to God. I didn't feel like that was an option. I felt like I had burned that bridge. I was such a horrible person that really, and it sounds counterintuitive when you say it, but there's a point that you reach where you just don't feel like you can go back.
That was just kind of the enemy's influence in your heart.
Yeah.
And how he likes to put someone in a corner and isolate them and make them think that they couldn't possibly ever come back from where they've gone, and they might as well just stay down this path, and wherever this ends is where I'm going to end up, instead of being able to say, no, I don't want to live like this anymore. I want to change, and I want to turn around and do something different with myself.
Yeah.
And I think that was the thing that I was trying to help you to understand, was there's not one single thing that you could have ever done that was going to make me not love you anymore. And if God can take you back, I can take you back. And we can, with him holding on to us, we'll figure it out. I don't know how, but we'll figure it out.
So there's a couple of things that deserve pointed out that happened during this time. There's a lot of things that happened. There's a whole lot to this story, but a couple of things that are worth talking about that happened during this time. One thing that happened was Jackie got to a point where she said, "I need some help. We need to have an intervention." So there was a little intervention that happened that was culminating that I didn't realize was going on. And I was sitting in the living room one night, and all of a sudden, my dad and one of my sisters walked through the door, and they had some Bibles in their hand. And all of a sudden, Jackie says, and Dad says, "We need to have a little talk." And I was fuming. I was pissed. I was uncomfortable. And I let them say what they had to say. It was the whole intervention thing. And one thing, this part of the story is really hard for me because I realized during this time that you think about it, my dad and sister, like they had no desire to be intervening in my life this way during this time. And the love that it takes to do something like that for someone is a special type of love. Because I can tell you right after they got doing their thing and saying their thing, I kicked them out of my house. I was just, one thing that was going on during my life right now is I developed a horrible mean streak, and I was a very angry person, which leads to the second thing that is worth pointing out, to just give a little bit of a description of who I was during this time. We were on a trip we decided to take with my parents during this time. Mm-hmm. And to give you an idea of how bad my anger was, Jackie and I have this joke to this day about holiday pies
at McDonald's.
Because McDonald's, where we were at, couldn't seem to get my holiday pie right. And
fast enough.
I had been waiting literally like 15 minutes for a holiday pie. So I went up the counter, I asked the person, they're incompetent, and proceeded to tell them how incompetent they were. They got the manager, who was
also very incompetent,
who I proceeded to tell that to, and they started to be belligerent to me. And I literally started to climb over the counter to go and grab them. Luckily, my dad saw me and grabbed me and pulled me back and took me outside. So I was a very angry individual. And it's bad when your mom takes you out the next morning for coffee and breakfast and says, "Son, I have this medication that I take, and I think you need to get on this." And so I knew at that point, when mom's having a talk like that with me, I got some real problems. So between that, and I think things started to get really shoved in my face as the kind of person that I was. And
our kids were scared of him.
Kids were scared of me.
Our daughter asked where he went during the week because she didn't like it when he came home on the weekends when he was on trips. Our son was always scared of him, and our youngest he actually we still are working with him. He's very attached to me, and I think it's just a byproduct of that time of his very formidable young years of having a dad that was very angry, and you just never knew what you were going to get with him.
Right. So I think we're getting close to where we may want to just break. But what I would say is there's something interesting that started to happen on the other side. And that was that I started to realize that, so I mentioned a guy that I gave a quote to at the beginning about the shadow side of us and learning more about who we are. And as we learn more about our shadow side, we learn more about God's grace. During this time, we tried going to counseling and different things. Nothing seemed to work. No. People were irrelevant, basically. But then it was interesting, some of the things that God started to use in my life. And we'll talk more about that next time. But the thing that I feel, one quote that I want to leave you with was another quote by this man, Brennan Manning. It says this: "My deepest awareness of myself is that I am deeply loved by Jesus Christ, and I have done nothing to earn it or deserve it. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of depth to that. And we'll dig into more about how the real meaning of that impacted my life next time.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Uh-huh. Hey, Facebook.
Okay, we're back.
We're back.
So, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure. My name's Jackie. This is my husband, Moses. And our names have been changed to protect the innocent. I just wanted to read a little thing I've been starting our live posts with, and it goes a little something like this. This ministry is for any who have reached a crisis point in their life. Born out of our own work, marriage, and life crisis, we found a way forward we never anticipated. In the face of infidelity, mounting debt, work panic, and a future filled with meaningless pursuits, life culminated in crisis that brought us to a point of desperate need. Through the most unlikely of paths, we rediscovered what was promised thousands of years ago in the Gospel of John as the full life, and described in Malachi as the floodgates of vitality waiting to be poured out. We have come to call it the Spillway. There is more to life than desperation.
Okay, so we kind of left a cliffhanger last week when we left off, and it may have bothered some of you. There's multiple things that might have bothered a lot of people out there, but it bothered us a lot too,
yeah,
right?
We had a really hard time with it.
So,
especially me. I woke up Sunday morning and I just laid in bed and I thought, oh my goodness, I feel so exposed. I don't like this feeling. And this week is going to be really hard to sit through all of this and not have any resolution to this for anyone that happened to hear it.
So resolution coming. So
resolution on the way.
Okay, so when we left off, we had left off where basically you had got to a point where you realized, and you had what I would call like an awakening, or your life had changed.
Yeah.
And you knew what was most important. You had come to a place where, you'd come to the promised land, essentially, is what I would call it. And I was still hanging out in the Shadowland, as we kind of titled the last week. So I think, kind of what's important is to recognize that in the point where we're at right now, in the story, basically I had reached, I was getting close to what we would call the bottom of the pit.
Yeah.
And so the bottom of the pit is right around the corner. Is there anything else like we should say before we get to that point?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, we dig right into it?
Yeah, just go right ahead.
Okay.
Go for it.
Okay, so at this point, when we left off, we had left off last time where I had switched jobs. I had gotten into more partying, more drinking, definitely a lot of womanizing, had gotten into the most serious affair that I had had to date. And at this point, life was spiraling out of control. So interestingly enough, I had talked about how I had an anger problem. I was emotional in weird ways. Life was just sort of spinning out of control. And yet at the same time, I felt like something was happening. Something was coming. For almost 5 years, I had lived in the Shadowlands, or the darkness. Something seemed to be happening in the background that I wasn't aware, but I could feel it on a spiritual level. So at this point, I said I hadn't quite hit the bottom yet. So let's talk about what the bottom looked like. So I was at this job, best, highest position, highest paid, highest position I had in my career. At this point, when I was in my career, I had gotten what I would call kind of cocky. I thought I could do anything. I thought I could get away with anything. So I'd be out partying, very reckless with my job. The partying had sort of taken over and crossed over to a point where it was reckless and affecting even my work output. At this point in the story, I basically there was an incident that happened one time where I was in the downtown city partying pretty hard. Was partying out with a number of guys and women. Got back to my room, probably had like four different women in my room partying with me, and things just got out of control. I don't even remember necessarily the whole night. That next day, things started to kind of spin out of my control. So for the better, let me put it that way, for the better, in a good way. So God was about to really humble me, bring me to my knees. And so what happened was, basically word had gotten out about some of the partying that was going on. I was a superior to some of the junior people that were there. This got back to upper management. They got legal involved, because in any of these situations, it was important to get a perspective from legal. Everyone that I worked for loved me because I put my heart and soul into my job, but legal said, you know what? We know there's nothing like that, is overtly what we would call something that, we consider fireable, but we don't really like this attention. So I was being given a hard time. I was going through this while I was at work. And so at that point, if you remember, I said I'd gotten kind of cocky. So I said, you know what, I'm going to part ways with this company. Resigned because I thought I had another position lined up. I'd been in contact with someone else. Well, God, in his infinite wisdom and his ability to humble us in a way that only he knows how to do, allowed that to fall through. So interesting turn of events, in the sense that now I found myself at home without a job, without any big events to go to, without, a whole team of people.
In the reality of a family of 3 children and wife that stays home, and it can be, we're kind of fun, but it can be pretty dull compared to what he was used to.
Well, dull in the sense that I had built some things up in my head that I thought were, I think dull is just, dull is sort of a perspective. I feel like I was just anesthetized to life. And my kids didn't know me. Jackie and I were sort of, I don't think we even knew each other like super well anymore.
Not really. I knew, that's the kind of the funny thing is, I knew the person that God had made him to be. And through all of this, whenever I would see he would have all these horrible things that he would do, it was almost as if God had changed my heart towards him, and I didn't even see those things. I saw the redeemed version of him that was in there. And whenever I would talk to him about something, I feel like I spoke into that part of who he was. So it wasn't like I don't know, I just wanted to see him walk in the fullness of who he could be, despite all the stuff that he had done. So, he was home with us. And so it was like he got the best infusion of, even though he was in his worst spot, he was in the best spot for him on a spiritual level, because we were able to really build into each other. And I was able to, all the things that God had been building in me, I was able to impart onto him and build into him.
I love what you just said. So you saw in me someone that I would have no way of seeing in myself, obviously, with where I was at, but you saw someone in me like who I could be while I was at home. While I was grounded, so to speak. So I'm at home. I had a job fall through. Started working on some prospects for a job, but basically I'm at home. So funny side of it is I always have to be busy doing something. And I came up with this whole list of things to do around the house, but was feeling very, I just felt like I got dethroned. And that was a good thing. Looking back, and I loved that happened to me, but at the time, I just felt like nothing. So it's interesting in life when we are super busy and we have so much going on, we don't have time. The old quote that says, stop and smell the roses. And God was shoving the roses right up in my nose. So I got a big whiff of them. And what that looked like while I was at home was I started thinking about the man that I had become, who I had become to those around me, the pain that I had put them through, the ugliness that had come out, and really had become in some ways this is not a good thing, but I think God had to purge it through me and become semi-suicidal at that point.
It was kind of sad at the time. My sister had a baby, and it was her only baby. I knew she wasn't going to have any more, and she wanted me to come visit her, and I did not feel comfortable even leaving the house and leaving him because the enemy had done all kinds of things to him to get him alone on business trips or whatever, and the last thing he needed was to be home alone at home. So I had to miss out on something like that just because I wanted to make sure he was going to be okay.
Yeah. A lot of sacrifices that Jackie made for me during that time. Interestingly enough, I think we had mentioned before that Jackie and I had gone to counseling, tried counseling different places a few different times. Nothing seemed to work. Just unrelatable, or we had corny, but in some cases actually toxic. Been shunned, treated like cancerous. I'm sure some of you out there can relate to that.
It's almost like you don't even want to share your dark side at all with anybody because you're afraid of how it would be accepted or how people would treat you. And we experienced those very things that you're scared to experience.
We as Christians can be very, very ugly to each other and to those outside.
To non-believers.
Yeah, we can be very ugly, and we got a full dose of that when we went through this. A lot of judgment going on, just ugly stuff. Now, what I will say is that it gave me a good dose of who I was even before all this occurred. So I felt like before all this occurred, I was a very legalistic, very judgmental person. The guy that did this to his wife, I was the first one to say, kick him to the curb. They're scum. Let them rot for the rest of their life. And then I had to look in the mirror and realize that I was that guy. I was that horrible guy that I would have thrown under the bus. So at this point, what does being at the bottom look like? So this was the bottom for me. Semi-suicidal. Actually, let's just call it. I was just suicidal.
Yeah.
Okay, let's not sugarcoat it. And at this point, so I was talking about how we tried counseling, wasn't working. God started to speak to me through some very unique ways. One of those unique ways was through some books I started reading. I started reading guys that were dead. So some guys that had died started speaking to me through things they had wrote years ago. And these couple of guys started speaking into places in my life that I didn't realize I had big hold in. So let me give you an example. So one of these guys was a guy named Rich Mullins. Some of you have heard him, some may not have. He was a Christian artist back in the 80s and 90s. Very, very real guy, very authentic, dirty, lived a dirty life, but loved Jesus. Dirty guy, but loved Jesus. That's probably the best way I can describe him. Rich Mullins, one of the things that I got from him that really spoke to my life was, it's okay to be dirty as long as you realize that the dirt doesn't define you. That's the best way I would describe it. When there's a little quote that I use in my life called, don't let best get in the way of better. And in this case, like when you are at the bottom, you can't let define you the fact that you have nothing going for you. Okay. So still though, every day was just a struggle. I had this thing that I started doing when I was at home. I would go up into my bedroom when I was just feeling like this huge pit in my stomach and I didn't know what to do. I would go up into the bedroom. I'd lay down on the floor, face down, flat. And I don't know where this came from, actually. I just, it was like Holy Spirit was like prompting me to do this. And I would just lay down on the floor, prostrate, and I would just cry out, God, I need you. Like, I need you. I don't know what to do right now. Like, I felt like I could just die right there. And I would just lay my body out and just cry out to God that I needed him. And in those moments, God brought me back. So he made me realize that I had reached bottom.
Yeah.
And that the bottom was the bottom, and I was only going up from here. And through some of that dirty, abased feeling of being where I just couldn't go any lower, he started to bring me back up. So what did coming back up look like? Maybe you can talk a little bit about some things you started to see.
Yeah, well, God provided a job for him. It was like 10 minutes from our home, whereas before he was driving long distance to work. And he was 10 minutes from home. We could the kids and I could run up and see him at lunchtime, and he never had to travel anywhere. He came home every single day. And it was really frustrating for him because it was kind of a lower level position than what he was used to, but it was like God was giving him an opportunity to provide for us, but then additionally he was able to heal. And there was a lot of healing that had to take place between the two of us, and then also additionally in his own heart. Yeah. But he started wanting to lead our family in spiritual ways. He wanted us to get involved in small group, whereas before I was the one that was pushing anything, going to church on Sunday, reading Bible, doing anything outside of outside of Sunday morning. That was usually my prompting. But he started taking the lead on those things where he hadn't been doing that in a long time either.
Yeah.
And then we would just have these really great conversations. And before we knew it, we were like probably a year out, and we were like, oh my goodness, I don't know how we got here, but we got so far, we've gotten.
I think in the back of my head, I just never saw myself coming out of that. I never saw myself being a guy that was on the other side of that fence. Quite frankly, I didn't see myself being worthy to be with my family anymore. So I never thought that as a possibility. And the fact that that started to be a possibility in my life, that could happen, was just amazing. And so I started to realize like that being a man is in this world, or a woman, but for me as a man, like what it looked like to go through something like this and then to come out of it meant that you had to truth tell a lot in your heart. Okay. So one of those things that I truth told myself a lot was, and I started to read in the Bible and read through these books, was that I was a son of God. Okay. So if you think about it, what does a son of God look like? I thought about men like Judah in the Bible. Judah was, he was a womanizer, and yet we have a man that came out of Judah called the Lion of Judah, who was the Son of God. That was Jesus, who came through a womanizer. It's just amazing to think about, like, that God can use a womanizer. And is horrible. And I like to use that word womanizer because that's what it was. It was a horrible thing that I was doing. But at the same time, when you start to realize the darkness that's in your heart, that's a place that you can move ahead. Okay, here's the second thing that I would say that was really amazing that God opened up in my heart. Sometimes I talked to someone recently who I asked this question. I said, how is your relationship with God? Like, where are you at with him? This person said, quite frankly, like, I don't talk to God. Like, I don't know what he thinks about me. And so I responded with this, and this is something that God worked in my heart. Is there ever a point in your life that you felt loved by God? Okay, so that's a question. So was there ever a point in your life that you felt loved by God, that you were close with him, and that you felt one with him? Okay, so if the answer to that is yes, if the answer to that is no, there's a lot more that needs to be talked out with that. But if the answer to that is ever been yes, think about this. God is omniscient. Okay, so that word means that he's all-knowing. If God is all-knowing, and if he ever loved you, if you ever felt like, a oneness with him and a love with him, he knew everything that was going to come. So when I thought about that, I thought, okay, I know in my heart and in my life, God loved me tremendously. I felt that at one point. Then I thought about the fact that God knew all those things that were going to come in my life, all those times of womanizing, of drinking, of putting my wife through so much pain and my children through so much anger and hurt. And through that all, even before all that happened, and he knew that was going to happen, he loved me. So that was kind of like a, moment for me when that kind of like, I put those two cards together. So through that, God started rebuilding my image of myself, my self-identity is what I would call it. And more importantly, my identity of God, my identity of what I like so much to call God my Abba these days, is like my daddy, because before he was God, he was ogre God.
Mm-hmm.
But then he became like my daddy, my Abba, because then I realized that his nature towards me is not one of holding these things over my head. He knew about them, and yet he loved me all the way through. So what else do you want to add to that during that time?
I would like to add to, a lot of us as believers, and people in general, we like to categorize bad things. We like to categorize sin, specifically other people's sin. We like to look at other people's sin and say, line it all up, say, well, they've done this and they've done this, and I am better because I've never done X, Y, or Z. But the problem with that mentality is when you look at sin from God's point of view, he just sees the sin. He doesn't see all the levels.
Yeah.
And so that was something that that Moses and I had to really work through together, and that I didn't see, God had worked it out in my heart where I didn't see his sin at any sort of level. I just saw it as sin. And I was really thankful that God was able to do that in my heart, so that I didn't see it as some kind of, you did this one thing and so I can't ever go back. Yeah. Because there's nothing, if God can forgive any sin, then he can enable me, because I have his spirit in me. He can enable me to forgive anything too. And so that was something that we were able to work through as well, as far as the not having, because you did one specific thing, you can never come back from that. That's something that a lot of people really struggle with. I
did one specific thing, but many times. Like it was bad.
Yeah,
it was horrible.
It was horrible.
Yeah. There's no downplaying that, but so let's say this. Okay, let's talk about this for a second. There's a lot of men out there there's a lot of talk about the Me Too movement and things like that. And there's a lot of good things being brought to light. Okay.
No doubt.
Good things being brought to light that should be, and people that should be held accountable, men that should be held accountable, even women that should be held accountable through some things that are being brought to light, but mostly men. Okay. And so there's no taking away from that, and we need to be held accountable. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of men that are being discarded on the side of the road of our society. Okay. And what I want to say to those men, this is a man who wants to reach out to you. So if you're a man that feels like you've been discarded on the side of the road of our society, and you feel like right now you have no place to go and no angle to go, I want to remind you of something that our country was founded on, because I love this quote. Okay. My own dad is an immigrant to this country. And when he came, he passed through an area where there's this quote that's very powerful, and it's welcomes so many people. And it says this: give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. And so the reason I bring that quote up is this country, and more importantly, our belief was founded on the idea that the refuse is what needs saved the most.
Yeah.
And so I'm reaching out to all those men and women. And women, there's a lot of women out there that,
and there's couples too that have just been in this really awkward, yucky place, and you're not really sure how to move forward. And we've walked the path forward, and so we want to help you walk that
Yeah.
path and find the path.
So there's men out there that feel like they have no way out and they're just refuse and this is who they are. This is not your identity. And you need to know that, okay? There's women out there who have been discarded by husbands or men in their life that have refused to come back and just maybe haven't reached rock bottom or may never come back. You don't know, okay? And we're here for those women too. And we're here for the couples that are trying to work through this and are being told, you can get a divorce.
Yeah.
You don't have to do this. You don't have to stick it out with each other. Wives are being told, husbands are being told, you have a right to divorce and this is probably the best option. We're here to say, we don't believe that's ever the best option. We always believe that the best option is to work through it. And we believe there's an identity crisis out there with a lot of men and women, and we want to help. So anything else that we want to say? I do
want to throw out one last little plug. We have a session that we do the first Saturday of every month. We do at Compass Coffee here in Akron.
Yep.
And you're more than welcome. We have it this evening. We're going to be there at 6:30, and we have discussion. We hang out. We
dig into some of this.
Our culture is vulnerability and transparency, and that comes from us first. And that we hope that it's something that you want to do. You come join us tonight.
Yeah. The most important thing to know is that when we talk about this, we talk about transparency, then we talk about restoration, and then overflow. And we feel like it's important to realize that there is a life on the other side of this that's not going back to what you had and restoring what you had. It's a better thing. We feel like we have a better thing than we've ever had.
Easily.
That's what we call living in the overflow.
Mm-hmm.
So,
definitely. And additionally, I want to, there's a couple people I kind of want to thank because they've been really good to us. And when Moses gave his testimony for the very first time to a couple of ours, their response to him was just total acceptance. And we probably would never be doing this if it weren't for them and the way that they were opened up and were kind to us. And even our pastor and his wife, and how they just were kind to us and encouraged us to do this. And our friend who's in the room right now, he helping us get all this recording. We're not really into this stuff. So just thank you and everybody that's helped us to do this. This is definitely not something that comes naturally for us.
Thank you, guys.
So, thank you.